Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. London generates many mixed emotions for people in Wales, but like it or loathe it, the city has had a massive influence on all walks of Welsh life and has done so for millennia. As such, understanding how it is run is important to Wales, and in May, the city has a pivotal moment. It elects a mayor again, a race that will shape the city's trajectory for the next 4 years. This evening, we delve into the heart of one of the UK's largest democratic elections and look at all things London. Joining us this evening are Lib Dem Assembly member Carolyn Pidgeon, who is a graduate of Aberystwyth University and a long-term political campaigner and councillor. Caroline was elected to the London Assembly in May 2008 and is currently Deputy Chair of the London Assembly Transport Committee and a member of the Police and Crime Committee and also a member of the Budget and Performance Committee. You seem to have to sit on as many committees as some of our members of our Senate and the Assembly as well. Hello, Caroline, how are you?
Hello, very good. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're also joined by Green Party Assembly member and leader of the City Hall Greens, Caroline Russell, who joined the Assembly in 2016 and serves as chair of the Police and Crime Committee, where she's focused on the reform of the Met. She's also deputy chair of the Health Committee. Hello, Caroline.
Hello.
Joining our Assembly members, which is something we don't often say in Wales anymore, it's great to have you with us, is Gareth Morgan. Gareth is part of the London Welsh diaspora, who was originally from the Rumney area of Cardiff. He's now Tottenham-based and MD of Cavendish Consulting, one of the UK's leading communication consultancies. Hello, Gareth.
Hello, thanks for the invite.
No, thank you very much for being here. So before we start going into some of the key issues that will be discussed during this election, some of our listeners may not be that familiar with the London Assembly and its work. Caroline P, as the longest serving member of the Assembly in this discussion, can you give us a little bit of a background on the organisation and the role of Assembly members therein?
Absolutely. So on the same day we elect the Mayor of London, who I'm sure everyone has heard of, there are 25 London Assembly members elected. 14 are elected in kind of super constituencies that are made up of 2 or 3 London boroughs. And 11 of us are elected using a form of proportional representation rather similar to the ones used in Wales and Scotland, so that we represent, all voters in London. So 25 of us are elected, and our role is to hold whoever's mayor to account and all the different bodies that make up the Greater London Authority, so transport, police, fire, and also mayoral development corporations. And we scrutinise those. We can amend the mayor's strategies and budget, but only with a 2/3 majority. But we are the check and balance on a £21 billion budget.
Caroline, you must have some thoughts, having served in the Assembly since 2016. How would you describe the work involved being an Assembly member?
Well, I think Caroline P has kind of outlined the big picture, but I think just in terms of how we work in relation to Londoners is really important. So particularly for the London-wide Assembly members who are elected by proportional representation, we tend to focus, rather than on a geographical area of London, we tend to focus on issues. So one of the things, for instance, that I've focused on in this recent term has been the lack of public toilets. And I have had unbelievable engagement from older Londoners, but also people representing groups with particular health conditions, where the loss of public toilets over the last 10, 12 years has really impacted people's ability and convenience of getting around our city. And so kind of listening to people, bringing their voices into City Hall, raising issues with the Mayor of London, and then actually persuading the Mayor that there's a gap, that he needs to do something, and getting some action. So that's kind of how we tend to work. The 14 constituency Assembly members are much more, they have like about 6 or 7 parliamentary constituencies each to deal with. There's 74 parliamentary constituencies in the whole of London. So just gives you a sense of the scale of it. But those constituency members kind of have more of a kind of geographic relationship with people and tend to pick up localized casework and get involved with very local organizations rather than the sort of the bigger picture London-wide people.
You obviously, you're not a member of the London Assembly, but obviously politics in London are a big part of your life. What do you think the view of the Assembly is with Londoners in general, and do you think the institution has been a success since its creation?
I would say it's probably the arm of London government that most people struggle to identify.
Yeah.
And I think the probably the biggest way it kind of gets into the public consciousness is when an assembly member is a really good campaigner. So he does lots of good scrutiny work, certainly, but I think most people would struggle, I think, to kind of pin down your big names, I think, in the assembly. But actually, I would say credit to both Caroline's actually for being really good campaigners and picking up issues that people care about. And I think that's probably the way that the assembly will kind of accidentally kind of come into view for lots of people in London.
Mm. I think it's a very unusual form of government. It doesn't, having a mayor with executive power and I think it's a £22 billion budget now, but it's and a body elected specifically to scrutinise how that budget is spent and all the policies and plans that underpin the spending of that budget. That doesn't, none of the other elected mayors have the same kind of level or commitment to that level of scrutiny. And I think that is, because it's such an unusual form of government, you have to be really quite a political nerd to kind of really understand exactly how it works. And people, they're really confused about the ballot papers, and generally about the way it works. So, yeah, if anyone can work out how to explain it better, that would be very good.
But one of the challenges that we all face on the assembly is when we have good ideas, either collectively as a body, and we work very well cross-party because our job that unites us is holding the mayor to account. If we put forward good ideas, the mayor will take them but not give us any credit for them. And individually, we might have the same. So for decades, I campaigned for a 1-hour bus ticket in London. And this mayor brought in the hopper fare. And to be fair, just at the end, my last mayor's question time, he did kind of comment and, admit that it had been my policy. But actually, that's now, he's adopted that, so it becomes his. Likewise, we do some really important work around how money's spent. So, for example, we interrogated the £56 million that was wasted on the Garden Bridge project, which started under Boris Johnson. It was really bizarrely procured through a charity trust that was set up. And ultimately, the bridge was never built, but £56 million was wasted, 2/3 of which was public money from government and from London. So, we have made sure that lessons have been learnt and different processes are in place so that can't ever happen again on the next pet project that another mayor has. So we do play an important role. It's not always the big headline issues that so people can see it.
In such a small institution, what kind of role do the AMs who are of the same party as the mayor have to play in the scrutiny process? Do you find that it's quite difficult, maybe sometimes getting people to act in sort of contravention of the traditional party lines when it comes to scrutiny? Caroline R.
Well, I mean, one of the examples was with the toilets, and everyone was agreeing that it was a really good idea to spend money on putting toilets onto the transport network, because that's something the mayor controls. And it's a way that he could make a real difference, helping Londoners to travel around our city, seeing it as an accessibility issue. But the Labour Assembly members pushed it off into the long grass by suggesting a feasibility study rather than actually amending the budget a year ago to actually put some money towards doing it. So the feasibility study's gone ahead, and the mayor has now put £3 million a year in place for a team at TfL to be doing that work. But actually, if those Labour Assembly members had run with, they all agreed the need for toilets. If they'd kind of actually gone for it, we could have had money a whole year earlier to actually get going on that work that would have made a real difference to Londoners' lives. So I think, there's, that's if you've got a very big group of assembly members, the same as the same party as the mayor, then that is a problem for the assembly being able to have much influence.
Let me give you a couple of good examples, though, where actually people have kind of stepped away from being the same party as the mayor. So when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, he bought 2 water cannons from Germany, and he wanted to have water cannons as a tool that the Metropolitan Police could use when policing protest in London. Now, the only part of the UK where you can have them is in Northern Ireland, where they're licensed. So he tried to effectively bully Theresa May into allowing these to be operated in London. Theresa May went away and did a piece of work on it with experts and decided not to grant him permission. But we as an assembly did a piece of work. We carried out 3 hearings in a couple of weeks, including one with Boris Johnson himself. And the Conservatives on that committee effectively had, if you think of political party, a free vote on it. They listened to the evidence and they voted different ways, different members, but they listened to the evidence and put their views, and the majority view was these are not suitable for the streets of London. And so that was our strong view that we fed into the Home Secretary as well. And likewise, we did a piece of work in this term, which I chaired, on overseas trade visits. And one of the guests who came before us was a close friend of Boris Johnson, Jennifer Akuri. And in that, it was going to be uncomfortable, some of the things we looked at, but the Conservative members accepted that we needed to be looking at that and allowed the scrutiny to go ahead. They may not have asked many difficult questions, but they allowed them to be asked. So I think people can sort of step forward and step back, knowing that we as a scrutiny body need to look at something. It may be uncomfortable at times.
This is sort of just tailored all the time politics, though, isn't it? People in political parties not necessarily wanting to hold their colleagues' feet to the fire. Do you think there's any issue with that in London, whether that be Labour or Conservative AMs?
I want to be a bit mean to friends who are Labour, actually, because I think there are quite a lot of Labour people who are ambitious, don't want to be Assembly members, is my experience. They're quite keen on being MPs or running one of the big boroughs where they can actually make some quite big spending decisions. So whereas I would argue the quality of the 2 main parties, the other parties, particularly Lib Dems and the Greens, obviously, is really good, because I think they are naturally people who would have become MPs if there were 300, 200 MP options in the country as well. So I will kind of credit where it's due. I actually think the quality of non-main party Assembly members is actually pretty good, and they're good campaigners. I think there's a lot of people that could spend 10, 20 years in the Assembly of the main parties, and you'd struggle, I think, to say what they've done in that period. So I'm probably getting in trouble with some friends, but I think that is true.
Could I just say it's been used as a stepping stone for MPs of all the parties, actually. But if you look at the current Home Secretary, James Cleverly, he came in with me in 2008 as a London Assembly member, Kit Malthouse, Victoria Borick, Meg Hillier, Lynn Featherstone from my own party, and one of the Green Assembly members is running for Parliament as well in a target seat. So, it has been seen as a stepping stone. But, it's very different now to the makeup back in 2000, even before I was there, where there had been this vacuum of regional government, and you had people, such heavyweights who've been leaders and cabinet members running local authorities in London, a number of members of the House of Lords, people who brought such depth of experience. Now we're in a very different place, and people perhaps have been a councillor for a couple of years and so on. You don't have quite that same experience with the newer members, and it's about learning how you work together in a different way. It's not like town hall or Westminster politics.
I want to come in because we want to touch on some of the kind of key policies of this issue, but of this election rather. But really want to have a little bit of a focus on the mayoral election, the head-to-head. I know there's 13 candidates in total, and the Lib Dems, you've got Rob Blackie, Caroline, and the Greens, you've got Zoe Garbett, other Caroline. But, is it really a 2-horse race? And, is there going to be anyone other than Sadiq Khan or Susan Hall really coming out as winners? Can you see anything other than that? Or is that just we're too remote here to really pick up on that? Gareth, do you want to just give us a quick overview of the runners and riders?
Yeah, so And I guess the context this time as well is we've got a different electoral system for the mayor as well. And I think that's one of the intriguing bits actually is the dynamic of that. The concept of a second round runoff, etc. I think gave a lot of people the freedom to have a free hit in the first round and then put in the second choice, the people that you'd want to win a runoff. So I'm not quite sure how it's going to pan out this time, but other than the one poll we saw relatively early on in the campaign where it looked relatively tight, I think he's sustained pretty much a 20-19 point lead throughout the campaign now over Susan. It's quite a nasty campaign on some levels. There's quite a lot of policy in this one, bizarrely, but it's simultaneously quite nasty. I think the Labour camp are quite keen to attack Susan Hall on a personal basis for the type of people she's aligned with in the past. Quite clearly a pro-Truss supporter at some points, has been quite clearly pro-Trump as well. And I think she's made a few bloopers, I guess, in the early stages of the campaign, particularly around the numbers, around certain things like how much does a police officer earn and these type of things. And I think Labour have gone quite hard on it. But I would say they've gone equally hard against Sadiq as well, and there's a lot of personal framing on the Conservative side around not just deficiencies on policy and this perceived attack on drivers and whatnot, but they're bigger, I would say, culture war type issues that they've not been kind of slow to chuck in as well.
I think one of the things is Sadiq is very keen to frame it as a two-horse race, but actually it's a one-horse race. I mean, Sadiq is in all the polling is right out the front, and actually I think people are really grumpy about being told they've got to vote for one of two candidates. And I'm picking up a lot of people just saying, look, Sadiq's, he's got such an advantage, voting for one of the other candidates is not going to be a problem. It's not going to, it's not that kind of, I think people just get really grumpy about that negativity of saying, you've got to vote for this candidate to keep this other candidate out. And I think people feel like, actually, it's a pretty foregone conclusion who's going to win, and actually, then it's just vote for the candidate you like best and the one whose policies you prefer, and there's actually a sense that that the better the candidate does from the party you support in the mayor contest will actually have an influence on whoever gets elected as mayor. Even though we kind of pretty much know who it's going to be.
Well, I think it's different this time, and we'll be able to analyse it afterwards because we've got the change in the voting system. So we used to always, Caroline and I would have said it for our own parties, vote with your heart for the first preference and with your head for the second one. So it's kind of where you are, and then the hold your nose, which one's your, the one that you can cope with as mayor. And we have always had, while Sadiq has been mayor, the charm offensive a few months before the election, and my dear colleagues and friends, the Greens and Lib Dems and all this nonsense. He doesn't work cooperatively generally throughout the year because he is incredibly tribal. And actually, given that a lot of London is now quite a Labour city, if you look how it has voted, he could afford to be that sort of statesman in the city and bring other parties in and show that. And actually, Boris Johnson did that more in his first term than Sadiq has ever done. And I think that's quite interesting. I think that what he is suffering from, though, I mean, whatever one thinks about the Conservative campaign, it is quite dirty. It's quite full on. It's clearly appealing to their core vote. But actually, Sadiq Khan is suffering from the sort of incumbency drag, I would say. And he's been in post a long time. I've had people say, gosh, surely he can't run again, not for a third term, because nobody's ever won a third term. And so I think the problem he faces is motivating his voters to get out. And as it always is in any election, it's about turnout, it's about who's motivated. And the Tories are trying to motivate theirs and suppress Sadiq's and vice versa. And we're all after every vote we can get for the mayor and the London Assembly. And it will be interesting to see over that weekend as they count the ballots manually, not by computers this time, however long that's going to take, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I'm sure we can come back and analyse that afterwards to see whether it is a two-horse race or not. I would argue it probably isn't this time.
Yeah, just can I quickly jump in? The one bit I found extremely interesting, and this was as a kind of centre-left Londoner, if you will, or adopted Londoner, was the choice of Conservative candidate. I think there was some quite interesting people in the long list. You know, I use inverted commas interested in this occasion, and there were a couple of I would say moderates in the Conservative ranks as well in there. But they picked someone who I think actively polarizes and would push people who were kind of relatively relaxed about, you know, I might vote someone else who's on that centre-left space, is the prospect of a pro-Trump, pro-Brexit, pro-trust type character being anywhere near the mayor. I think has quite a big push factor on a lot of people. And I'm just intrigued as to whether there might be a divergence this time between the assembly vote and the mayoral vote, in the sense that I don't want to risk anything with my mayoral vote, but I'm much more inclined to say, but you know what, we need a broader range of voices on the assembly. So that's the bit I'll be looking out for, actually, is how much did the vote kind of split between the two.
We're going to come on to some of the big ticket policy items, and I think you both Caroline's been very candid there about the two horses or even a one horse race. We did have a question around that, but you know, you both parties are fielding candidates and both parties are putting out manifestos. I would like to just know what your kind of key manifesto commitments that you're putting into this contest are before we look into some detail. Caroline P, could you talk us through?
Yeah, I mean, the key area that we are focusing on is policing and crime, and it's about fixing the Met. Rob Blackie, our candidate, and our team of Assembly candidates are really passionate about this because they feel that, and we all feel that, too many Londoners see that crime is getting worse and they feel let down by the police. And we've seen that after Sarah Everard with women in London, but also the Port murders with the LGBTQ plus community. So, you know, the confidence in the Met, violent offences have gone up 30%, I think, since the mayor came in, and the clear-up rate for sexual offences and rapes, it's below 1 in 10. 1 in 10. So, you know, and that is just not good enough. So that is one of our big areas, looking to double the number of sexual predators that we catch in London and returning policing to local, getting back to borough-based policing and looking to put more police officers out on the streets and using money to put police staff in those back office roles to get, there's about 6,000 officers working on office jobs in the Met. I'm sure it might be quite comfortable for some of them, but actually we want those out on the streets. And so that's something that we're particularly pushing for, and also looking at recruiting more special police constables to get back to community policing and making sure that police time is used effectively. We don't want to waste time on things like cannabis possession, small amounts of cannabis possession, so on. We want to really focus the Met on the crimes that matter to Londoners. So I think that's some of our key messages around policing, which we think is the issue of the campaign.
Caroline, I was going to ask you a little bit about crime with your chair position, but you can comment on that. But also, what are the Green Manifesto? What's that's going to focus on?
Well, our manifesto was first to be published. I think Susan Hall's was only published this morning, and it's 27 pages, which is quite short and full of caveats about because she's made a big thing about getting rid of the ULEZ and the ultra low emission zone, and but she's saying to do it legally, because obviously she can't get rid of it on day one. But our manifesto is focused on affordability, growing inequality in London, and with sort of three big core strands. One is housing. Zoe is a private renter. She lives and experiences that insecurity of being a private renter, of being always at risk of being asked to move on. So getting the right homes where people want to live and at a price that's affordable, and massively standing up for renters. So bringing in lobbying for the powers to be able to control rents, and bringing in a rent commission, sort of, you know, right at the beginning of a mayoral term. Then the cost of living, cheaper fares, finding a way to bring down fares, starting out with the with bringing back the pre-9 o'clock travel for older people. That is having a huge impact on so many Londoners with caring responsibilities, Londoners who need to get to hospital appointments. That loss of pre-9 a.m. free travel has really had a big impact. And also bringing in free school meals, extending that beyond primary to secondary school pupils as well. And then the other piece is the Met and the safer city, the accountability, and, you know, fixing the the commissioner calls it fixing the foundations of the Met. And you know, we're kind of seeing the need for the commissioner of the Met to accept the charge in the Casey review of institutional racism. And that phrase that was used at the weekend by an officer of someone being openly Jewish, that's really uncomfortable listening if you are a Jewish Londoner. And the need for the Met to accept that finding of institutional racism and then do the work to adapt the processes and procedures and systems and training of officers in the Met is absolutely critical. So I think those are the sort of top three big things. And then obviously being absolutely serious about climate targets, but I'm sure we'll come on to that.
We'll try and get there. Gareth, you know, we just had crime highlighted as you know, one of the key issues. What is the take from your average Londoner on crime? Because the Mayor of London is also the Police and Crime Commissioner, which is an interesting take on the rest of England and Wales. But, you know, where is crime? How's it viewed in London? Because surely rising crime doesn't just rest solely with the Mayor. It's the UK government and the UK as a whole.
And I think that's probably the nub of a lot of issues in London. It's trying to figure out what's a national responsibility, what's a local one. And you see it not just on crime, you see it on like LTN policies and whatnot. Is that the mayor? Is that DFT, et cetera, et cetera? So, you know, it's quite a hard one because I think crime is different for different Londoners. So the things Caroline Pigeon just outlined about, you know, the clearance of certain types of crime are huge issues, you know, that massively concern people. But then I think at the other end of the spectrum, you've got, I don't know if you saw that Kevin Peterson ridiculous tweet the other week about him taking off his wedding ring before he went into London and whatnot. There's the other end, which is just Burke's scaremongering basically about an issue. So I think it's the reality is all of those things. So, you know, it was there is definitely an element of London, I think, where Londoners have kind of given up on reporting certain things. You know, there's absolutely a feeling of, well, what's the point? Nothing's going to get done, particularly around car crime and burglaries. You know, I think you report those crimes for insurance purposes, not with any expectation that, you know, something is going to be done. But I do think in some places, among some communities, it's kind of over-egged. The kind of Londoners aren't walking around, I think, in fear all the time in a kind of Kevin Peterson style manner. But it's definitely it's a real thing for sure. And maybe there's an element which, just to make it relatable to kind of, I don't know how much people in Cardiff, etc., counsel their kids about kind of hiding their phones and whatnot. Absolutely, that's a very real thing here. Is anyone who's got a teenage kid is kind of trying to coach some kind of level of street smarts into them to make sure their phone doesn't get snatched. Is definitely I would see a difference here in that sense.
I think one of the things, though, around policing in London is the disproportionality. And, you know, any parent, any black parent, black child is going to have that conversation with them about the police and the likelihood that they're going to be stopped and searched. we've had young people come before us in the Police and Crime Committee in this last term who, complain about being stopped and searched for wearing a jacket, stopped and searched for standing by the side of the road waiting to cross, stopped and searched for taking money out of a cash point machine. The relentlessness of the disproportionality just leaves Black Londoners feeling just in despair. And I think that's why today we've had news that Doreen Lawrence, Stephen Lawrence's mother, has had another example of the Metropolitan Police failing to get back to her on an issue around one of the murderers of her son. And it is the idea that the Met have failed to engage with the mother of Stephen Lawrence again. 31 years is the anniversary today of Stephen Lawrence's murder, and it's just it just beggars belief. And I think that's why this finding of institutional racism in the Met is something that actually the Commissioner is going to have to accept, because he's got to regain the trust of all Londoners. And I think until that finding is accepted, it's going to be really difficult to move that forward.
Yeah, I mean, the stop and search issue is huge in London, and we can't underestimate that, the impact it has on communities and the trust they have in Londoners. And, Black young men particularly are stopped time and time again, as Caroline has just outlined, and it is disproportionate. And when I have supported families making complaints about this and how culturally insensitive it has been at a time of Eid, for example, how they come back with a really unsatisfactory answer, even after meeting with officers. And it's not, so we need to be using the body cam footage much better, dip sampling, working with communities and really changing that. But, another example, obviously, Caroline's outlined the Doreen Lawrence issue today, but actually Daniel Morgan was murdered in London many years ago, and his family have fought for justice, and actually how the Met have handled that. And, the damning independent report, which took 7 or 8 years to produce, Caroline and I both have read it on the committee. We've met with the chair and her team. How the Met responded to that, complete denial, as though it's a historic issue rather than actually serious issues that still affect the police today, and how they have dealt with Daniel Morgan's family has been appalling. And it's unforgivable. And for this to have repeated itself in the last year and under the new commissioner, who generally I rate, but I think it's so unfortunate and shows they've still got a long way to go to turn the Titanic around.
So one of the other key issues that's being discussed throughout this campaign is ULEZ, as you said, the ultra low emission zone in London. What are the panel's reading on whether this is a popular policy, and do you think that it is one that will harm Sadiq Khan's re-election campaign, Gareth?
Well, there are definitely bits of London where some people are angry about this, but I guess I would fall back on two things. One is the percentage of kind of compliance, even in those outer London areas, is very high. I think it was around 90% when it kicked off initially, and now I remember I saw some stats the other week where it was like 95% now in compliance in outer London. So the people who are being negatively impacted by their cars not being compliant are relatively small, but they're very noisy, and they've got a lot of kind of people amplifying the stories they've got to tell. So it could have an outsized impact on the election for the amount of people that are impacted by it. But it's almost like a ripple from an initial kind of incident in the Uxbridge period, when that by-election went the way that Labour didn't think it would. And to his credit, I think Sadiq held the line on ULEZ when I think the National Party were quite keen that he kind of rode back on it for fear of kind of future London election losses. But my feeling definitely is it's kind of calmed down. But I live in Zone 2. I can get away with not using the car, etc. There are other people who aren't quite as kind of served even in London by public transport. So it is real for some people, for sure.
It is that kind of thing that I think for people in Wales, we think of London as this sort of bustling metropolis of the centre, really. We don't necessarily think of the outer boroughs of London, do we, that are sort of more reliant on on private car travel. But Caroline, what do you think? Do you think this is something that is affecting the average Londoner, or do you think it is just, like Gareth said, this sort of tiny vocal majority of people?
This is an issue because it's being whipped up as an issue in outer London, and it may affect turnout. But there are parts of outer London where people do rely on cars to get around or get around for part of the journey. And I think where the mayor, in my view, and our view as Lib Dems, has missed a trick is it's absolutely right to clean up the air in London, but to give people 8 months to change their vehicle or have to pay £12.50 a day was just too short a time. We felt you need to have a longer lead-in time. You needed to have a comprehensive scrappage scheme from day one, which we put forward as an amendment. And ultimately, what did the mayor do? A month before it's to go live, he widened it up to everyone. So lots of people who had done the right thing, changed their vehicle to a compliant one and spent money, then were not eligible for the scrappage scheme to get money towards it. And he won't take retrospective applications. You know, so I kind of think how he's gone about it is the wrong way, because we all want to clean up the air in London. But actually, what he has done for me is he's put things like pay per mile, road pricing and stuff off for a generation, because nobody will go near it now because how he has badly handled ULEZ. And it's such a shame because I live in zone 2 as well. You know, the rollout for the first phases went really well because people had 3 years to adapt. He rushed this one. Electoral cycles, I'm sure, didn't help there, but I think how he's handled this has not been good, and it damages the cause which many of us support.
To put on the record, when I lived in London, I lived in zone 2 as well, just so no one else feels left out. Caroline Russell, how do you feel about this?
Well, I think the mayor's just been way too slow on this. I think and not at all brave. He should have brought in smart, fair, privacy-friendly road pricing instead of rolling out the ULEZ. He should have, or at least made the way he rolled out ULEZ to the whole of London should have been done through a pay-per-mile system, because that would have been much fairer. The ULEZ is a big chunky fee, and once you've paid it, you can drive your polluting car around for as many miles as you like all day long without any extra payment. Whereas if there was a pay-per-mile charge, you would have had you had to say maybe drive an elderly relative into the zone to attend a hospital appointment, there and back, short journey, maybe at an antisocial time of day, so not rush hour. You'd probably not pay very much at all, certainly not as much as £12.50. So I think, you know, the mayor has missed a trick. He has, in the GMA Act, the powers to bring in a road pricing scheme. And he should have grabbed that and run with it and talked to Londoners about how to do it in and how that could be much fairer than paying a big area-wide charge. I mean, I did a report back in 2017 urging the mayor to make the ULEZ London-wide, and having talked to lots and lots of people living in outer London with children with asthma who were desperate not to be left out of the clean air zone. I think Uxbridge was Labour being absolute. If Labour had got behind the ULEZ, I think they could have even taken that seat. They've not shown the sort of courage of their convictions with it. And, you know, the whole point about these measures to clean up our air, we should also be reducing carbon from our transport. And that means reducing the number of miles driven. And having a pay per mile scheme is much, much more likely to reduce miles driven than a chunky area-wide fee. So I think the mayor has messed up in all sorts of ways. And the biggest mistake was not getting hold of pay per mile and running with it much earlier and giving people a good lead-in time for it.
Could I just add to the discussion, the other thing that has to go hand in hand with any sort of ULEZ or road pricing, whatever, is a massive boost to public transport to give people an alternative. And this mayor has cut 22 million bus miles since he was elected. So instead of absolutely boosting it, which actually Ken Livingstone did when the congestion charge came in, massive expansion of dedicated bus lanes and new buses coming in and routes, which gave people a genuine alternative. You need to see the same, and we haven't seen that. And the mayor's so-called super loop, I'm not sure I would brand it quite super yet. It's just a few repainted buses, but actually it's not delivering the scale of change that's needed to make someone think, actually, I don't need a car. I don't need a second car. I mean, that's what you're dealing with in outer London. It's households that have more than one car even. So I think that's the mistake. And you've got to bring communities with you to make these big changes. And that's where I feel Sadiq has failed in this area.
On the question of pay per mile, that is becoming a hot topic, isn't it, for Susan Hall's campaign as she now re-entered the last couple of weeks of the campaign. She's been saying that although Sadiq Khan has said he won't introduce a pay per mile scheme now, she's essentially saying you can't trust him, and that he may well bring that in if he's elected again. What kind of impact do you think that is going to have on the campaign in the last few weeks?
I don't think pay per mile will, but I would 100% argue that car use will be a much higher issue in this election than any other London one, in my opinion. And I think it's the combo of three things. It's the yes to ULEZ, but it's 21 mile an hour zones across London, which I know is a kind of potent thing in Wales as well. But I think probably the biggest one in many ways is the LTN network in London. These are the low traffic kind of zones where essentially access to certain areas has been limited to a kind of 1 or 2 points. And certainly I've seen them be completely polarizing things in London. People who are inside LTNs, I think are very positive about them. I live in an LTN. It's had a material impact on the roads around me in terms of the amount of cars, and I'm sure knock-on effects for air quality. But the surrounding roads where traffic has been displaced to, certainly for a short period, saw a spike in their traffic levels. And I think those three things combined together have actually wound up quite a lot of people in a way I've not seen kind of cars be an issue in an election before. And then I think you can throw in a dollop, sorry, Caroline, about like the 15-minute city kind of cohort as well, who are desperate to jump on anything. So but it's not just extremists. I think there are some people who just gripes around the way it's been done and the new reality.
I think you're right about the culture wars and the kind of, the sort of the war on the motorist kind of frame that is being pushed, and particularly by government ministers. But I mean, I think most Londoners get that 20 miles an hour, if you slow traffic down the speed that it drives between traffic signals, you don't actually increase journey time, overall journey time. You're just slowing down the speed at which you drive between traffic lights. And I think people do understand that 20 mile an hour speed limits reduce the severity of casualties. And that is, it's for any community that has experienced the death of a child crossing a road, it is, 20 miles an hour is just a completely obvious and sensible thing to do. And it also increases road capacity because the cars can travel a little bit closer together because the stopping distances are shorter. And, it's like people just move more steadily through the city. And so from an engineering perspective, 20 miles an hour makes absolute sense in a city context. So I think this sort of the weaponization of it, I absolutely get. And, the whole kind of people being worried about a 15-minute city. I mean, for goodness sake, yes, imagine the horror of being able to walk to your dentist, your doctor, your kid's school, and some local shops. I mean, what a terrible place to live. It's mind-boggling that people have got informed about that.
I think we can go to town on 20 miles per hour policies in Wales probably better than London can at the moment. But look, we're into our last 10 minutes, so I do want to get a few more key policy questions out.
Okay.
Caroline P, housing in London is massive. It's a massive issue, and I personally think London's housing market influences the rest of the UK in many ways. And you've also got, I'd call it a homelessness epidemic in London. I think recent figures are around 4,000 people sleeping rough in London. Where are these issues in the campaigns?
Well, housing is always a really important issue. And in fact, when I ran for Mayor of London for the Liberal Democrats in 2016, it was one of the key issues that we were advocating, setting up a GLA-led, our own London housing development company, because clearly the developers aren't doing what's needed. So actually, let's bring it in-house. Let's work with partners. Let's deliver the housing that's desperately needed in London. And I think Londoners are experiencing a housing crisis. Rents are going up because it's all supply and demand. It's not, difficult economics. And many people are stuck in bad and poor quality housing, whether that's council, housing association, or private rented. So we think the way to deal with this is to build far more homes. And some of that will be affordable housing, of course. And that will ensure that you improve the supply of that housing. But we also, I know Caroline outlined her party's views earlier, but rent controls, we don't think work. They don't work. You look at other places where they have brought them in Berlin, the supply of rented apartments fell due to rent controls. We don't believe that's the way forward at all. One issue we think is really important to focus on is providing legal support for tenants in order that they can deal with landlords where they are in substandard housing. But we also think we need to continue to pressure national government to abolish residential leasehold, which has left people really trapped in unsuitable conditions. Homelessness, absolutely, we need to be doing more in that. But we think, building more housing, more social housing, is the way forward to tackle this huge issue in London, as it is elsewhere in the country, as it is in Wales.
Caroline R., do you want to follow up?
Well, I think building more genuinely affordable housing is obviously important, but my colleague Sian Berry on the Assembly has got the Mayor to use reserves to actually enable councils to buy homes that have been built already and actually bring them into use for social housing. So rather than actually building it, buying homes that have actually not sold on the market and get them being used for social rent. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can increase the supply of homes, which doesn't necessarily mean always building new, because what's happening in London is huge amounts of 1-bed and 2-bed flats are being built. Many of them actually sit empty because people invest in them and then they want to keep them in mint condition so they can sell them on. And actually, it's making sure that we're building homes for people to live in and that are the size of homes that people need, because the amount of casework I have as a councillor in Islington, which is another elected role I have, of people needing to move on from an overcrowded situation. And once you're overcrowded, things like damp and mold and condensation get worse, because overcrowding, you've just got more people cooking food, washing clothes, having a shower. All of those activities create moisture in a home and add to the condensation and mold problems. So it's, overcrowding is absolutely critical.
Gareth, I just, you can mention the housing if you want, but we are running out of time. But I did want to get your thoughts on what Business London recently said, that London needs to retain a lot more of the tax revenue it generates. Is that coming across in the campaign at all? And do you think, that will make London even more unpopular with the rest of the country?
Well, the parties might be talking about it in bits and bobs. So I've never heard really anyone kind of on the doorstep or kind of people I know talk about that. It's very kind of like how much we subsidize in the rest of the country may well come up on occasion, which obviously doesn't ingratiate ourselves with anyone outside of London either.
The real issue here is actually about there will be a new government of whatever colour later this year. How do we make the case for London, but also for other city regions, to be able to raise their own finances so they can invest in the infrastructure that's needed? And I use my final Mayor's question after 16 years to push the Mayor of London to set up a third finance commission. Boris did one and Sadiq did one, but actually to look at what we can know, what innovations there are, how can we raise the funds that we need to spend on the services in London. And some of that does mean us retaining things like some of the property taxes that London has. But actually, it's really important. If we believe in devolution, that's got to include fiscal devolution. I'm really passionate about this, not just for London, but for the other regions of the country. This begging bowl politics that we have in the UK, which is so centralised, we have to go with the begging bowl. Please, can we have a little bit more, because we want to build some housing here. We want to extend a tube line. It's just not acceptable. And, you know, I have a bigger view that if we look back to the terrible referendum where the majority of people voted to leave the EU, take back control did not mean take it all back to Whitehall and we keep it there. It means to take it further and devolve it to the communities right across our country. So I'm really passionate about this. Sadiq, if he is back, I hope will take this idea forward. We need to make a case to the next government to help London, but also the rest of the regions of England.
And just one tiny extra thing there, the VED, vehicle excise duty, gets kept by central government. We then have problems in London with not enough money to fix the roads, and the big roads that Transport for London has responsibility for, like, you know, the sort of the Westway, you know, which desperately needs investing in. They keep having to reduce the speed limit just so that the road doesn't break, carrying the weight of traffic, travelling at higher speeds. And, you know, we've seen Hammersmith Bridge as well, which through lack of maintenance has ended up in a situation where it can only take bicycles and people walking, which, you know, as a Green, that's, you know, quite good to have it being used as a walking and cycling link. But actually, it's an absolute failure of our city management that we allowed it to get into that state of disrepair. And maintenance is not very glamorous, but it is absolutely critical. And all our infrastructure with rising climate crisis is under much more pressure. Railway lines are built for extremes of temperature that don't go as far either hot or cold as we are now experiencing. And this is going to be a huge issue going forward and is going to need an awful lot of investment.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for taking part in this evening's recording. If people want to hear more from you, where can they go find you on social media? Caroline R?
At Caroline Russell on Twitter.
Wonderful. Caroline P?
I think it's at Caroline Pigeon, but Dioch, it's been wonderful being with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Gareth, what about you?
I think you should follow the Carolines. They're much more interesting than me.
We'll pop it in the show notes. Thank you. And if you have enjoyed today's episode, then you can find out more from Hiraeth on all the socials at HiraethPod. You can go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And thank you so much for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallets, you can go to www.patreon.com/HiraethPod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.